All the hands.
And if you guys want to vend at cons, all right. So yeah, hopefully this panel will help. I think I've done this panel at least 10 times this year. I'm not sure.
Have you?
Because I've been to 23 cons this year, so and I know I've done this panel a few times, so I'm assuming like at least I've done half of them, so it's probably like at least 10 times. So hopefully I'm better at doing this panel now, because normally the first 2 times it was like kind of just
He's done his trial.
collecting ideas together. I guess we're still waiting.
Were you asking about AV?
Yeah, we need a projector.
Yeah, there wasn't a request put in.
Sure.
So I'm sorry.
I thought I did.
Yeah, sorry. I've been asked. I went off to and found my director and everything. I'm sorry, there isn't anything.
Because I know for every panel I applied to for this panel specifically, I requested a projector and HDMI cable.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're not coming up with anything. Yeah, sorry.
Do you have one last minute you could bring down?
AV isn't responding to anything, and I don't have access to that.
Yeah, because I'm sure, because I always put that in the space, HDMI and the projector. Not sure I got a follow-up email on this panel either.
I'm guessing all the rooms are pretty much in use, but is anything like Hartsfield open that just like has one there all the
I
time?
can't move people, so yeah,
Yeah,
I'm unable to move people. Unfortunately, sorry. Yeah.
I guess this is the third panel that did have the projector.
Yeah,
Well, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah,
No.
I did the best I could. I ran around.
Well, so when I finish writing my con book, I guess this will be my experience for MFF, which sadly, hopefully, the next ones will be going well. Not really the best experience because I actually canceled another panel to improve the market, which is kind of
So
weird.
if any of you guys in the back that want to like see this,
Yeah, if you guys can move up, that would be great.
It's a little smaller.
Yeah, I know I posted a request for that, so it's kind of weird. All right. Well, guess we get started. So. I'm not happy with this now. Well, I guess for those of you who don't know me, I mostly vend at My Little Pony conventions and the pony fandom. I'm known as Chocolate Pony. I'm known as South Park Dallas and other areas. Outside of conventions, I'm a medical student. I've done genetic research with Johns Hopkins. I also specialize in writing history books. I had a new book published this year called The West Point of the West, which is one of the first books on military academies. And following in that tradition, I'm actually working on a new book about conventions themselves. So if you guys are interested, check out that book. I'm not sure if it's here yet. Within the con scene, I've been senior staff. I've run conventions. I have been a panelist. I've been a community guest. I've been a guest of honor. But more importantly, I have vended and done the artist alley at almost every type of con, from the anime con, the furry cons, the pony cons, to the sci-fi cons. So over the years, I've collected a bit of information about the different types of conventions that have been out there and kind of combined them. Oh, looks like we have a projector. Thank you. Save the day.
Thank you.
I will save it today in just a minute and see what kind of.
Okay, it's HDMI cable.
Just HDMI?
Yeah.
Okay, I need to go grab that.
All right, thank you.
Yay.
If you guys have any questions afterwards, you could visit me in the vendor hall. And I also have, you can follow me on my social media, which is small. Hopefully you can see it on the projector when it comes up. But in the meantime, let's get started. So I'm going to kind of divide the panel into these specific categories. Let's spell out con artist, coincidentally, that's how I do the anagrams. So I'm going to be telling you about creating, organizing, networking, applying, research, travel, making innovative items, setup, and taxes and sales. So hopefully this should give you a rundown on what to do. If you've never been at a con before, this should be a good primer for what to do at cons. And if you have vended at cons, hopefully this should give you some different ideas and perspective of what to do at the cons themselves. So this coming to this panel, it's already assumed that you already know how to do art, and if you don't know how to do art, then I'm sure there's a bunch of art panels that are at this con that you go check out. But this is assuming that you already know how to do art and you want to try to take your art to the next level. Most artists want to make a living off selling their art. So this is basically what I'm going to help you with. So you should already be motivated with your art. You should like doing your art because this will eventually become work for you. Even if you're not doing this as a full-time thing, you're still going to have to push yourself to draw. So make sure what you're drawing is what you like doing and selling. And make sure you have your day-to-day life organized so you're able to pursue this right away. So organization is really, really important when you start wanting to do this. So whether you're doing this as a full-time thing or a part-time thing or just want to test out the waters and see if you can vend at conventions, making sure everything is organized is very, very important. So as you can see here, it's an example of some of the lists I randomly have. So this is what I use to keep track of inventory. You can see I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of just information of what I have and what I need to keep track of. Alright, so most of you, if you're new to vending at conventions, you might not know too many other vendors. So the first thing you want to do is start trying to network people who are existing vendors. So if you have friends who are artists who have vended at cons before, that's the best thing you want to do is to try to talk to these other artists and get some information from them. Ask them about vending. For example, if you have a friend who's a vendor, maybe you could ask, hey, can I share half your table at this next con? And by sharing a table with them, you could see how they work when they vend and see how you're able to do without having to worry about getting an entire booth for yourself. Now, if you don't know any artist friends who are vendors, the next thing I'll tell you to do is find a bunch of groups around artists and artist alleys. In fact, there are a lot of groups based around artist alleys where artists kind of share information with each other. You could check Facebook, Telegram, Skype, Discord, all these different groups will be there. For example, in the My Little Pony convention community, there's a Discord group where we do group orders, so we're able to like share information. Say I'm ordering a bunch of wall scrolls, okay, add some wall scrolls to there. So basically everyone can order in bulk and it cuts down on prices. It saves on shipping since we all ship to the same hotel. On Facebook, there's a group called Artist Alley International, which is primarily based around anime cons, but it's also helpful. They are also really on board, like to say, oh, Acon just opened their Artist Alley application, so post it there. So you can stay up to date with that, and they will also do group orders, like, hey, we're ordering a bunch of lanyards, who wants to do lanyard orders? So finding a group based around different artists is an important thing to do, and it'll help you kind of network with all these different individuals. Not sure why the screen's not right. Okay, so you kind of have your art ready to sell and you know a bit about which cons you want to apply for. Now, the next thing to do, and the most important thing, is applying for cons. Because for me, this is a full-time job. For others, this might be a hobby. But for me, doing this as a full-time job, I'm in a really weird situation where my job is kind of reliant on high school volunteer fanboys to decide whether my art is good enough to be in an artist alley or not, which is kind of it's like weird because like if you're like, I'm also a genetics and biology major, so if I'm able to show my research paper and like all my credits, then I'll get the job. For artist alleys at cons, it's really volunteer run, so it depends on what they like, and so I'm going to give you tips on how to successfully try to apply to as many cons as possible. So we're going to project down here? Or?
Onto the wall, yes.
Wall, okay. Alright, we'll take a little pause so we can try to get this set up.
Oh, you can keep talking.
Okay.
Just don't find the tech guy that's at the back of the room that's totally invisible and can't be seen.
Alright, so most cons will use 3 different methods for accepting applications. So the early cons were the sci-fi and comic cons, and they started the basically the jury or vetted method. So comic cons are really the first to innovate the idea of artist alley, And the original Comic Cons were based around the idea that professional comic book artists like who worked on the Batman or Spider-Man comics will be there to kind of sign, so kind of like mini guests of honor that will draw people to the con themselves. So most of the original hits of artist alleys were based on what I was saying earlier, merit and credit. If you worked on this many titles, if your art was really good and they knew that you were a big name artist, you would be accepted. And people who did not have the best art, they would not be accepted. So most cons still rely on this method. It's called the juried or the vetted method. And specifically, it's mostly comic cons that do that. Some cons like BronyCon do that as well.
Sorry.
So most cons still use this method, but in Japan, if you guys know, the largest fan convention in the world is Comic-Con. It's 3 times larger than San Diego Comic-Con. And Comic-Con developed their own type of artist alley. Their artist alley was based around the Dondinshi market. Now, Dondinshi are a bunch of fan-made manga, normally smut, but it's all fan things. So people who vend at the artist alley at these anime cons basically create fan content. It's not something that they started themselves. So artist alleys were then open to, let's say, the fan creators as opposed to professionals. So way to make a bread, the predictor bread. All right. So now that so in the 90s when anime comics became really popular, almost everyone started applying. So to kind of make sure that only the people who they knew were like kind of on the ball and really wanted to vend would get a spot, they basically shifted to the first come first serve system because the jury method works when you have a big team of volunteers to look over your art. But now that there are a lot more applicants in the thousands for a very limited number of table, you don't have that much volunteer staff to look through everything. So the first come first serve method became the big thing. Now in the day of the internet where everyone connects to the internet on their cell phone and stuff, the first come first serve method doesn't really work because everyone's going to start applying the second the application's open and they're going to fill. So for example, Anime Expo. I've been trying to apply for Anime Expo Artist Alley for the last 8 years in a row. And that's basically one where you have to apply on the dot, and if you don't get in, then yeah, you don't get in. And in the last few years, I applied the second it opened, and it always is completely full within like the first 10 seconds. Even this year, I was saying, hey, I actually emailed the staff, I'm flying, I'll be on a plane the minute your application opens. Is there anything you could do since I've been trying to apply for a while to get in? They're like, sorry, that's the rules. I was like, okay. So I had to buy Wi-Fi on the plane. I had the atomic clock running so I knew the exact second to apply, and I still didn't get in. And it was all filled with, I actually got through the first stage, and when I went to pay, boom, all the spots are taken. So the first come first serve method doesn't really work now for a lot of cons. So most cons have shifted to a lottery system. Now the lottery system is kind of like the weird great equalizer, because the juried method is based on how good your art is. The first come first serve system is based on how fast your internet speed is. The lottery method kind of puts the guy who draws a Superman comic and someone who draws ugly Homestuck art on Tumblr in the same category. So it might not be fair to one group of people, but it kind of gives everyone a level playing field. So sometimes cons that do have a lottery method, you could kind of see their artist alleys kind of mismatched because of that. But in reality, when you have very low staff, that's kind of the most efficient way to apply for cons. And a lot of cons have shifted to that system. So Oldacon, for example, is a con that does the lottery method. So to apply for these cons, make sure to know ahead of time. So if you're trying to apply for a con that's first come, first serve, yeah, basically have that date set on your phone, have the alarms ready to go so you know when to apply the minute it opens. And I would say that atomic clock thing is not a joke. Have the atomic clock running so you know exactly the minute to apply. Now, if you're going to a con that still has a juried method or a vetted system, don't rush to apply the minute application's open. Make sure your portfolio is good and only apply when your portfolio is good and ready to show. And if you're doing the lottery one, well, kind of good luck with that, but it will kind of give you an even playing field to try to get in when you do that method. Now, research what type of cons you want to apply for. Know for your strands. Obviously, you're all here at FurryCon, so I'm assuming you're going to want to try to apply for FurCons. But each of these different types of cons work for different types of artists. So if you are someone who wants to sell original art, let's say you have your own original webcomic or you want to sell your own original characters, Comic Cons are best for that because most Comic Cons now don't allow fan art because they have the people who are already working on the official Marvel and DC comics. They don't want people doing fan art at these cons. So most Comic Cons want people to have their own original indie comic, their own original webcomic, and Comic Cons are great for that. Now, if you like to draw fan comics or fan art, so for example, if you're a My Little Pony person, you'll go apply for My Little Pony cons, but let's say you just like drawing Overwatch, or you like drawing Homestuck or Undertale or something like that, then anime cons are the cons that are kind of open for artists, for fan artists, except I think Otakon, which is weird because they ask for 50-50 of your art, but how could they check your art if their system is a lottery method? So Otakon's a different story. But most cons do ask for, most anime cons are open to the idea of fan art because of the doujinshi tradition. Now, if you don't want to drag it along luggage like I do and bring it everywhere, have giant displays and all that, and all you want to do is just bring one backpack, one notebook, one pencil, and just draw right on the spot, FurryCons are the best for that because, you know, us furries are kind of egotistic. We want our OC drawn, that's basically it. We don't go to buy someone else's character. We come to these cons to get our own characters drawn as badges. So if you're really, really good at drawing fast on site, then FurryCons are the best for you. Especially the Artist Alley. Most FurryCons Artist Alleys, you only have half a table. You sometimes don't even need to pay for a table, so it's the cheapest option for you to try to apply for cons. Now, depending on what you want to do, make sure you know your legal rights in regards to the work. If you do, let's say, want to sell Overwatch fan art, make sure that the con is okay with that because you might get in trouble, they might get in trouble with the IP lawyers. I've been to cons where they have IP lawyers walking around, and if, like, let's say Nintendo or Disney employees see your art and they don't like it, then too bad, your art is either removed or your entire booth is shut down and you're kicked out. So make sure you know your rights when doing this. Alright, so as I said, I was working on the convention history book. Some of the stuff in the convention history book I was talking about is all these different types of cons. Like I was saying earlier, most of the cons we have kind of descend from the science fiction conventions. And then anime cons basically introduced the idea of the Artist Alley. Comic cons introduced Artist Alley. Anime cons kind of introduced the idea of the Fan Artist Alley. And most of the other cons kind of fall from that angle. In fact, if you look at, I kind of made a family tree of all these different cons. You can see where a lot of these cons kind of extend from. So for example, some of you might know, but FurryCons actually naturally evolved from science fiction cons. The FurryCons actually got started in the room parties of the science fiction cons, and actually science fiction cons are really famous for the room parties. And you can tell which cons kind of come from science fiction cons because they normally would have a giant bulletin board in the lobby that have all the little room parties listed, and they'll have a FurryCon style method. So for example, if you look at the PonyCons are kind of styled after whoever staffed a previous convention. You can kind of see that style. So for example, TrotCon, a PonyCon in Columbus, Ohio, is kind of based around the AnimeCon method because the staff there used to work for AnimeCons. Nightmare Nights in Dallas, which just had its last year this year, it's run by a bunch of furries. So that con is going to be based around a furry method. BabsCon, which is the PonyCon in San Francisco, you can tell it's run by science fiction folks because they have the bulletin board in the lobby, they have the room parties. So you kind of see that a lot of newer cons either take from these older cons. So you can kind of see if your style works for these different cons as well. Now, even though most of you guys are here at FurryCons are probably going to want to vend at FurryCons, I'm going to suggest to try to branch out and try all these different types of cons. In fact, most cons are going to fill a certain niche. So for example, when I was living in Baltimore and DC, these are the cons that were located here. And you can see that a lot of these cons fall under predictable numbers. So the largest cons anywhere in the world are always going to be the entertainment cons. So these are like Awesome Con, San Diego Comic Con, New York Comic Con. Even though Comic Con's in the name of some of these cons, they are now multimedia con. They're a con that welcomes television shows, film, novels, all that stuff. And these cons are always going to be above 30,000. These are going to be the largest types of cons of their type. And almost every major city in the United States will have one of these types of cons. So in Baltimore, it was Awesome Con. Then the next level down, you're going to have cons. You're going to notice the cons become a little bit more niche. And the nicher they go, the less attendees they have. But going to multimedia con might be kind of too big and too crazy for you for a first-time vendor. So if you want to specialize, go down to the next level. The next level are going to be the industry cons, so cons that represent one specific industry. So for example, the comic book industry or the anime industry. So in Baltimore, the good examples are Baltimore Comic Con, which focuses just on comics, and Otakon, which focuses just on anime. And if you're stronger at comics or stronger at animes, specializing in these different cons will be better for you when you apply. Now the next level down are going to be genre cons. So these are genres of these larger industries. So for example, science fiction cons, horror cons, fantasy cons are within these industries, but they have low niche genres. So if you want to specialize more, you could go to these cons. And these cons are in the 5,000, 10,000 range. Then the lowest level types of cons are going to be the fan cons. These are based around fandoms. A good example is Star Trek cons. Star Trek are based around all the incarnations of Star Trek, and if you're specialized in one type of fandom, you can find a Doctor Who con, or Harry Potter con, or Star Trek con to go to. Next level down from that will be the My Little Pony cons, or cons that specialize in just one generation of a franchise. So My Little Pony cons actually don't focus on My Little Pony at all. They focus on Gen 4 of My Little Pony. And then the nichest and the smallest you'll get are the furry cons, because they're not based around any franchise or idea. They're based around the community itself. And these are the cons that are good if you don't want to base your art on any pre-existing product. And if you want to go to any of these cons, look no further than your backyard. Almost every single major metropolitan area in the United States will have at least one anime con, one comic con, and sometimes one furry con or one pony con. So at random, I chose 3 different areas: Dallas, Chicago, and Atlanta. And as you can see, Chicago, Dallas, and Atlanta all have one multimedia con, one anime con, and one furry con. And all these cons are at a really consistent level. The furry cons for all 3 of these cities range between the 4,000 attendees range. The anime cons range in the 20,000 attendee range. And the multimedia cons are in the 70,000 range. So you don't have to travel all around the country to try these different types of cons. Just go to the cons in your local backyard and you'll have a subset of all these different types of events. Now, if you do want to travel, let's talk about traveling, because sometimes you might live in Nebraska or something. There might not be a con there. So let's look at the different cons for traveling. So when you travel, you have to take into consideration the cost of travel and the cost of hotel into how much you're vending. And if you're first-time vendors, you might worry, oh, I'm paying $300 for a plane ticket, I'm paying $500 for the hotel. How am I supposed to make up this money? So the best thing to do is try to calculate and save on travel by looking at the cheapest option, but also maximizing how much you want to do. So one good example is, if you can, call the convention center or a hotel ahead of time and have them ship the luggage to the hotel. So if you're able to ship like your prints or wall scrolls, those are very, very heavy. Call the hotel ahead of time, and normally there might be a small fee. I've never had to pay a fee to have something shipped to the hotel, but that's something you can do, but make sure you call ahead of time. Now, I've done 23 cons this year alone, and I've traveled all across the country for the cons. So I have to try to look, I don't have a car myself, so I have to look up the cheapest way for me to travel with all my luggage. If you guys have seen my booth, I have a really, really big booth, so I have to fit it all within my luggage. Now, the cheapest option you're going to have are the bus systems. So you might have a Megabus or Greyhound in your city, and that could take you pretty far. In fact, I took a Megabus from Austin to Dallas. It only cost me $1, which was a really, really good price. Most Megabus and Greyhounds will range between $5 to $20, so this would be the cheapest option. But most of these buses, you're not allowed to really bring anything more than a small luggage bag like this, the airport luggage bag. So you really can't put anything more than this. So if you have enough stuff that you can fit into here, this might be a good option for you, or something to fit in your backpack. But if you have any more than that, they sometimes charge you or they leave you there. I've been left at the megabus stop because I had too much luggage and I couldn't throw it away, so they just kind of stranded me there. But it is the cheapest option, but you are really restricted in how much you can bring. Now, the next level up are going to be the trains. Now, Amtrak and some other train systems can take you kind of all around the country for a really cheap fee. When I was living in Frostburg and I was doing cons in Baltimore, I would normally take the train. It only cost me like $30 for a one-way trip. So it was very, very affordable. But most trains also restrict your luggage. You're allowed one check-in and one carry-on item. So you have to kind of fit what you can in that type of system. So if you are like me and you have a lot more items, so I could take a bus or a train from Austin to Dallas for cons, but because I have a lot of items, I've oftentimes paid the $90 plane ticket from Austin to Dallas because it allows me to bring a lot more luggage than I could on the bus or the train. And if you're going to be like me, you're going to use the plane system a lot. And my recommendation is Southwest. Southwest, normally when you look at Expedia or Travelocity, they don't have the prices for Southwest on there, but Southwest is normally the cheapest of these options. And they are going to allow you 2 free check-ins that are under 50 pounds and 2 free carry-ons. You can bring a lot with that. In fact, my entire booth is packed in those 4 baggage of luggage. And I've traveled so much this year, I apparently became an A-lister, which also helps for miles, and it helps you gather up miles. So if you're like me and you don't have a car, then plane would be the next great option. Now, if you do have a car, then your luggage restriction is as much as your car could carry, and that's great. So you can bring as much as you want in the car. The only problem is now you have to calculate gas, and if you're going long distance to a con across the country, you also now have to calculate hotels. You might have to stay at motels along the way. So this is going to add up in price. So you could bring a lot of stuff, but it's really, really restricted. And if you're really a pro at this, like if you are the folks who sell the giant fursuits or like the folks who vend at anime cons, and you have to have those giant heavy metal displays and large items, you're going to have to rent a van or a truck. And that's going to be really, really expensive. But if you can make that money back, then that's great. So keep in mind all that I'm telling you, how much do you want to bring versus how much you want to pay for travel. Now, sometimes you might have too much and some things don't sell. So what I recommend after your first few cons, look at what's selling for you and what's not selling for you and start cutting things down. So, for example, when I first started vending at pony conventions, I was doing everything. I was doing wall scrolls, prints, I was even doing hats, patches, all that stuff. But after my first few pony cons, I noticed a majority of my sales came from my tarot cards. I specialize in tarot cards. I was the only one in the pony family doing tarot cards, so I had a monopoly on that, and because of that, people came to my booth just to buy tarot cards from me. And when I kind of calculated, like 2 years ago, I calculated how much my sales were at BronyCon, and I noticed tarot cards made up like almost 50% of my sales. So at that point, I made sure to focus more on tarot cards, and I looked at what was not selling. So if you look at that small red sliver, that were the prints. Most people sell prints at cons, but I noticed prints barely made 1% of my sales for me. Because of that, prints weigh a lot, they take up a lot of space. Now that I could get rid of prints, I could focus on other things. So if you guys knew the story about the founding of McDonald's by the McDonald brothers, they opened their first shack basically selling everything, barbecue ribs, hot dogs, and whatnot. But once they noticed 90% of their sales came from fries and burgers, they completely dropped everything and focused on burgers and fries, and that's what you should do. Drop everything that's not selling, even if it is selling, if it's not making enough, focus on what is. Now, what to sell? You have to think of innovative things, think of new ideas to do. So what I recommend for you to do is don't try to copy what other artists are doing. Try to be new and innovative in what you have. Find a signature product that you could specialize in. So if you actually look around the dealer stand here, you notice that some people are selling like steampunk things, some people are just focusing on tails, some people draw on an art noir style. Each person is going to have their own unique item or thing they sell. So for me, for example, it's the tarot cards. People know me for my tarot cards, so people are going to buy tarot cards from me. That's my signature product, and I could build all my other products around that. Or if you don't have a signature item now that you think is unique enough, take what everyone else is doing and put your own unique touch on them. So if everyone's selling print, do prints that glow in the dark or prints that sparkle. If everyone's doing buttons, do buttons with googly eyes on them. Do something that's kind of unique with your items, so it kind of makes them stand out. And also what I recommend is balance between original and fan art. Because I know a lot of people want to just draw fan art because that's what sells. But if you are in the game to be a professional artist, you want to, I'm sure all of you have your dream project, whether it's a movie or a comic book that you want to do. And you're worried it's not selling. But that's the thing that you're trying to do. You focus on your original art as well as the fan art. And like I said, some cons like Otakon want original art, even though they're not good at judging what's 50% of sales. I got an email right before this that Otakon said I couldn't apply, I couldn't vend because I had too much fan art because my stuff was original. So that's why I'm a little grumpy about Otakon at the moment. You keep on hearing ranting about them. But most cons do want you to have some original art, so it's, like I said, specific comic cons. And that's what you should be aiming for, trying to pitch your original comics, even if they're not selling, try to make it the focal point, because what will happen, like right now, the My Little Pony fandom kind of is in the gray area of Hasbro. Technically, what every single artist in the pony fandom is doing is technically illegal. You can't be selling Hasbro's IP in your artwork. But Hasbro kind of turned a blind eye and they were allowing it because they know it's helpful for the con. But the day Hasbro says, no, you can't do this anymore, all pony cons are gone, and all the people who make money selling at pony cons, well, they have to find another job. So always keep that in mind. There will be a day that your fan art is not allowed to be sold, so you have to focus on your own original content first. So make sure to focus on that. Now let's talk a little bit about what types of items you could sell. This is basically my thought process of trying to make items to sell at cons. So like I said, my tarot cards have been my primary seller. So because of that, I started focusing on trying to do more tarot cards, more tarot decks. I tried doing different things. So right now you probably see acrylic charms and acrylic stands as really, really common at anime cons. But when I started doing them, no one in the pony fandom was doing it. So I wanted to be the first to try to do things like this. So here's a acrylic stand I made for BronyCon, and I was the first to do it, and I thought I would do well. Turns out these are not good sellers. Even though everyone liked them, they didn't sell well for me. So sometimes if you're the first in something, like I was the first in doing tarot cards, it worked out amazingly for me. I was one of the first to do acrylic stands, barely any sales. So sometimes being the first in something is not great. Here's some new stands I made. I thought this was a really cute idea. I had like little ponies and little terrarium jars. I thought, oh, this will be great. People will love them. In fact, when I posted on Twitter and DeviantArt, everyone was saying, these are fantastic, I want to buy them, and they barely sold. So even some ideas that you really, really like might not sell, and you have to eat up the cost of production. This was another experimental idea. I thought I would do a little stress ball plushies, and again, this is something that no one else was really doing at the cons I was vending at, so I thought I would try them, and they did sell pretty well, but they took on so much work, I didn't think it was worth it to try to make more, so I did these for one con and kind of just phased them out afterwards. Here was another ingenious idea I thought was really good. I had a wallet with Rainbow Dash on it, and the zipper was actually Rainbow Dash's tail. I thought, hey, this is a really cute idea. No one's thought of this one. Again, a really bad seller. It took me almost 2 years to finally sell my initial stock of these items. So ideas that you think are good might not sell well. On the other hand, sometimes the ideas that are dumb that you don't think will sell. So for example, these are some dumb drawings I did, making fun of the Oni cartoons but with ponies, and I probably drew these in like 10 seconds, so like really crappy, and I just printed them out as joke badges, and yet they became like one of the best sellers at BronyCon a few years ago. And it's like, hey, I worked really hard on these like acrylic charms and on this thing. I spent like a lot of money in making these and a lot of time, and yet these things are the ones that sold out. So it's like sometimes the dumb ideas sell, so you don't know what sells. And here's some stuff I made for furry cons. I tried to experiment with different styles. Sometimes having little small buttons and trinkets, which I'll explain later, are really, really good for vendors. I also like doing pins. I was one of the first in pony fandoms to actually do enamel pins. Before the pony fandom, I used to work professionally designing pins for military units and some companies and corporations. So I love pin design, so it's like, hey, how about if I take what I used to do as a work and put back into the fandom. So like, let's say you specialize in woodcutting and stuff, take what you do and try to put it into in community. So pins were something that I started doing, and it seems like now everyone's doing pins. So again, tough market, but if you enjoy doing it and it sells, it sells. Let's see. Yeah, and here's another example. I was like the first in the pony fandom to actually do the flags and the coins. No one back when the PonyCon started were doing flags and coins, yet they were really, really bad sellers for me. So I thought, hey, no one likes these, so I'm going to stop. And once I stopped doing them, all of a sudden other people moved in and started making their own flags and coins to sell. And they were actually, it seemed like they were doing pop-ups. Like, hey, this was my idea. It didn't sell when I was doing it, but it's selling when other people do it. So now I'm doing them again, they're doing well. But sometimes, like I said, if you're the first to do something, it might not catch on. Wait till everyone else has an item that you see is kind of popular, and then try to go back and do it. Because sometimes being the first is not helpful. And like I said, tarot cards are my main thing. I've been selling the same tarot design for 5 years now. Even though it's my most popular tarot cards, I want to expand. So since people know me for tarot cards, I try to do more different tarot decks. So here's a new tarot deck in a completely different style I did for PonyCons this year. Here's one I made for furry cons, one with animals on them. So I tried to make different tarot decks for different cons I applied for, just so it's a little bit of variety. This is original content. Alright, so now that I told you all that stuff, the fun part is setting up, because if you walk around the vendor hall, you see all these different booths, all these different displays. If you've never tried to vend before, how are you going to display all your items and make it eye-catching so that everyone is going to rush to your booth? Well, there are some theories I came up with, and if you've seen my booths over the years, I've experimented with so many different layouts. I've built tall, I've built wide, I've built for the eye, I've built for close level. Here are some of the ideas I noticed when trying to make my booth setup. So it's basically a pool between maximizing visibility and maximizing how much stuff you could display. Now, this is going to be an interesting conundrum, which I'm going to explain later. But you could fill your booth with everything possible. Every single inch of your booth is filled, but it's not going to be visible for the eye. And while there's a lot of stuff that people might want, your attendees might just gloss over them. On the other hand, if you display just a few items, it's easier to catch the eye, but you might not be displaying enough that everyone's going to want everything. So you have to find the balance between the two. I have kind of found the latter, where I try to fill up with as much space as I can, with the hope that someone will find something that they want. So here's some ideas for kind of making use of space. Build as tall as you can in some cases. If you're renting in a convention center, build tall. Sometimes there's a height limit, but know what the height limit is. Because when people walk in convention centers, high roof, high ceilings, they need to see everything from a distance. So if you have a random banner sticking up, we're going to find you right away. And on the other hand, at a con that's held in a hotel, so if, like, let's say the dealers, some cons have dealers' rooms in like a hotel room like this. Building tall is not really going to look, because people are going to go into the room at eye level and they're not going to see something that high as opposed to walking to a convention center. So put items in line with people's eye levels. Now, here are some new vendors. Actually, I think they vended at MFF last year. I met them at Otakon 2 years ago, and fantastic artists. They have some really good art. But you kind of see that they're new vendors because they're just kind of mixing and matching all their stuff together. Everything is just kind of cluttered. It's not really working right. And if they only kind of took the time to kind of display their art in a more precise order, it might attract more people. So even though you're not going to vend at this level, look at what the professionals are doing and try to take from them. So if you go to anime cons or comic cons, you're going to have people selling merchandise. These are the guys who do this as a full-time job. This is their living. So see what they are doing at their booth and try to make use of it. So for example, here's a booth at an anime con. They're using the build high method. They're putting all the wall scrolls up and they're putting the plushies at eye level. You might not be selling the exact same items, but you could take the ideas that they are doing and try to apply them for yourself. So that's what I try to do. So for example, I try to look at the different methods and create my own booth. Last year at, I think this was BronyCon 2 years ago, I tried to experiment with what I could put at eye level, what I could put at height level. So I went through a lot of drawings, and in fact, this is what you should do, you guys. I assume you're all artists if you want to sell your art. So make use of your art skills and try to make mock layouts of your booth so you know what you might want to sell. So when the time comes to set up, you can set up right away instead of worrying about trying to build your booth last minute. Because if you know what in your mind your booth looks like and you have it on paper, it's easier to build right there. So for example, here are some sketches I tried to create for my BronyCon booth 2 years ago. I worked out many times on where I wanted to display everything, and because of that, when I went to the con, I was able to build that display right away and adjust it. So for example, one thing I miscalculated was the size of the wall scrolls. The wall scrolls were double the size that I thought they would be. So because of that, I had to shift it around, but because I already had the initial construction laid out on paper, all I had to do was just kind of shift some items around and keep everything nice and consistent. So this ended up being my booth at BronyCon for that year. Some new things I tried, so some cons are in dark lit areas. So I decided to try to do the LED lights to attract people to certain things. So at this point, this was the first year I tried to do badges. And so when you stand up, I put the badges at eye level, so when people look at them, they would look at the badges. I would put things that adults and older folks like I guess older college-age students, millennials were like. So I did a lot of my silly things. My things are based around memes, and things are based around pop culture at the highest level for them. And on the bottom level, I did cutesy things that kids would like. So putting things at different eye levels for your different audience helped. And putting things that kind of attract people from far away, like the lights, also helped a lot. Here's another example of me trying to work on the booth beforehand. I normally have 2 tables. Some cons I'm forced to stick with 1. So I have to rework all my items into a smaller booth. And like I said, sketching things out helps. This is one of the booths I did. This is a con in San Diego that I had a really small booth with. And I was able to build my booth almost exactly to what my sketches were because I was practicing ahead of time. Some things I tried to do that was different was, since I knew that the kids were shorter and they looked at eye level, their eye level was a little bit shorter, I made use of the table to put stuff that kids would like. Kids like touching things, kids like picking stuff up. So I would recommend not putting breakable things at that level so you want kids to touch them. But at the same time, buttons, they like buttons. So I decided to put the buttons in baskets at their level so they could play around and look through the basket of buttons. So again, trying to build for eye level, it's good. Different audience. Again, the idea for a booth and how it ended out. And this was at Windy City. I think it's actually held in the same area. I think it's run by the same folks who do MFF. PonyCon in Chicago. Again, I made a mock-up of my booth beforehand. You can see there's a digital mock-up I did. And this was the booth at the con. You can see I was able to build it near exact because I got the image in my head ahead of time. This was my booth for BronyCon for this year. This was the mock-up, and this ended up being the booth. And I must say, this is one of my favorite booths I've designed so far because it incorporates a lot of different elements I did, like the signs being high up. You can see I put the signs high up so people from distance could see the sign with the big font, big print. They knew items being there. And then at the lower level, you could see things on display that they could point to. And at the bottom level, you have loose items like my card games and my sample decks and my pins that they could touch and kind of look at. Right. So I told you guys I put my baskets in my buttons in the basket, and it works for me, but that might not work for you. So for me, buttons don't really make up a big percentage of my sales. The purpose of the buttons are to kind of attract the kids who want to play around with the buttons, or they are to be what I call impulse items. So someone might come to my table, they might want to buy a wall scroll. Wall scroll, let's say, costs $25. Then they come up to my booth, they pay, they look down, they see a basket of buttons, like, oh, I like this design, add this to the sale. So impulse items are things that are supposed to be add-ons to your main items. They're not supposed to make up much of your revenue, they're just like extra tips if you like to think about them. So a lot of my buttons I put in baskets at the checkout window. So when someone comes and buys stuff from me, when they look down to pay, they can see, oh, hey, let's add this to there. So make sure you have a bunch of little impulse items that you can add on to your booth. Now, if your main thing is selling buttons, don't put your buskins in a basket, because the mistake of putting buttons in a basket is it's all mixed up. They don't know what designs are in there. They have to dig around and try to treasure hunt to find these things. If your main item are buttons, put your buttons nice and orderly. Now, again, this is the example of maximizing space versus maximizing visibility. All the buttons on this board that this artist has could easily fit into that one low basket I have right there. So it fits on a little square space on my table. But these people, because they have to make sure their buttons are nice and displayed, it takes a bigger amount of space, which is harder, which means they're sacrificing space. But what they get in return is visibility. So if buttons are the main thing, it's easier if buttons are nice, easily spaced so people can point and pick the designs. Take that into consideration. Alright, like I said, if you're running a convention center, big tall booth, big tall sign. For example, the booth on the far left, it's not a nice looking sign, it's an ugly sign, and it doesn't really work with the booth. But because it's so tall, people could see it from far away when they enter the convention center. They could see the sign right away and walk right up to them. And of course, at almost anime or Comic-Con you go to, you have the giant tower t-shirts, which everyone sees from a distance. So if you're able to build high, put at least one sign very, very high, even though your booth is not going to be that high, so it could be seen in the distance. Sometimes knowing what convention center or what hotel you're renting at, knowing what their tablecloth color and then picking a different contrasting color could also attract the eye. So for example, this is the Baltimore Convention Center. If you've been to the Baltimore Convention Center, you know they make use of a bunch of white cloths and teal blue tablecloths. And if you go booth after booth after booth and there's nothing but blue tablecloths, your eye is just going to merge with the eye and you're going to pass by your booth. This group right here, Interbane Studios, I think they're a local group of comic artists in the DC area. They made use of the light blue and bright yellows and reds, and because of that, their booth instantly stands out in the sea of all the people using the exact same tablecloth the convention center has. And in fact, if you go to the dealer stand here, you'll see that you might notice subconsciously that the booths that kind of stick out to you are the ones that use different colored tablecloths. Right. There's another good example. This was at IkiCon this year. This booth Cute and Deadly. It was a really, really dark room, but because they have bright purples and lime green for their table banner and their items, their booth instantly stood out. Here's another group, Tasty Peach Studios. You probably see them almost every anime con. This was in the same area. This was in the basement of a hotel. Really dark, very dreary. But their booth instantly stood out. This is a crowded room. You can see there are people in front of the booth. But I'm able to identify the booth right away because of the bright paints that stick out. So you walk up, you see they have a really nice setup. It's a natural flow in, so it kind of traps people in the booth. A lot of booths makes use, instead of just having the table, they move the table back so people kind of flow in or kind of trapped in that little gap. And they kind of maximize the setup, because you go to any kind of event that they almost use the exact same setup. Doesn't matter if it's a convention center or a hotel, they use the exact same setup. So this was in the hotel in Austin at IkiCon. And this was their booth at Oldacon in the Baltimore Convention Center. Two very different areas to bend, but able to make use of the same booth. And it's still just just as effective at both booths. You could see the bright pink from far away, and you are instantly drawn to that and naturally flow in and walk. Some other things you could do is make use of that space ahead. So for example, if I was vending here, I'll probably fill that area with a bunch of wall scrolls. But they are putting it with their t-shirt designs. Now from a distance, you don't know what they're selling. You see, oh, there's a cute narwhal, there's a cute sloth, there's a cute bunny. That looks really cute. And your eye drawn for it, and you're curious to see what this thing is. Is it a print? Is it a wall scroll? You walk up and realize, hey, they're actually t-shirts. Okay, I might want to buy a t-shirt. So if they hung their t-shirts up, the design is so small you can't see from far away. But by blowing up the design, it kind of attracts people. They say, oh, what is this? They walk up, oh, it's actually a t-shirt. Okay, cool, I'll buy it. So again, they're making use of their top space instead of displaying their name or what they're selling by displaying their art. And again, it's another type of sacrifice, but in their case, for a t-shirt seller, it's a big gain. Alright, and if you go to anime cons a lot, you'll notice walls and walls and walls of people with prints, and your eyes just kind of glaze over all of it because it's just too much. And even people who do this still try to make certain items stand out. And here are two good examples. they made use of having a nice little area where they could display their charms, so the charms are nice and orderly. So while all the prints behind them are kind of a mess, you can still easily point out which charm you want, and it's easy to see from a distance. So even little things like this help. Again, this is maximizing ability. They're taking up so much space with those little charm displays, but what they gain in return is a really, really visible booth. And again, here's the same booth again. I was talking about the buttons. They also have lanyards. Again, all that space they have is a lot of space that's being used. For me, I could fit all those lanyards, all those buttons in this space this big, but because they have it all spread out like that, it's easier for the attendees to see the designs they want and buy things. So since lanyards and buttons are not my main thing, I want to display like this. For them, this is their main thing, and it's a fantastic use of a display to try and pick out what people want. Right. Another good example, just simple cork boards having the buttons on them. Again, nice, orderly, very neat. And if you guys were at the vendor hall, the dealer stand here, this was my booth at the dealer stand. You can see I kind of have a mix of all these different styles. I put the sign at the top level for when you walk in from a distance. I level, I have the small items, and then I make use of the table for all my things. One thing, also, if I have a corner space, so I have a corner space this time, if you have a corner space, that's extra space you could use for things like banners and stuff, so I put a giant banner up to try to attract more attention. These are some of the tarot cards and the badges I sell. Again, badges are not my main item, but I do have some badges at this con, and I kind of display all my badges there. And while I try to keep it nice and orderly, it does take up a lot of space to put badges there, and it's kind of hard to see. But someone who specializes in doing badges, Mary Mouse, if you guys her badges are everywhere, you've probably seen her badges. Mary Mouse has been selling badges for many years, and she's able to make great use of it. So she has all her badge designs printed on this one tiny little banner. And because of that, she saves a lot of space. If I try to display as much badges as her in my booth, my entire 2 tables will be filled with nothing but badges. Then I won't have space to display my prints and my cards and stuff. But for her, she was able to simplify all her badges so they could fit on just 1/3 of a table. And that's a really great way to, if you know exactly what's in your inventory and what's in your stock, if you could shrink down and do displays like this, that's great. Another booth that stuck out to me, really nice bright neon colors. Again, with all the prints that kind of look the same, if you have all of a sudden booth that has like all these bright colors, it instantly stands out. This is another booth that was in the dealer stand. Stabler Cake. Again, fantastic t-shirts, fantastic designs. It's very identifiable from a distance. I think the picture cuts it off, but you can see they have a bright neon tablecloth that stands out. Again, different than all the other vendors in the dealer stand. Here's another booth that I guess I think everyone has passed by. She makes use of her fantastic displays. So she's sacrificing table space here. So normally if you sit to vent, you don't want to put stuff in front of your face so people can't see you. She's sacrificing that, but she could stand up and talk to people this way. So she's maximizing what she could use at this area and talk to people head on. She has a really, really great way for displaying her t-shirts, her lanyards, her stickers. Again, these things stand out. Yeah, in the background, you have a large print. The sign is visible. It's easy to see it from distance. And because of her unique style, it contrasts so differently from what the other booths by her have. Here's another fantastic booth setup. Again, making use of a cohesive style. So my booth looks completely different from these booths because I draw on so many different styles. I do oil paints. I do inking, I do neon colors. Because of that, most people think I'm a bunch of different artists, even though it's all my art. That's one mistake I'm trying to fix. I'm trying to cohesively work towards one art style so that my booth looks like it's done all by me. But people who have cohesive art styles stand out fantastically because it just all melts together. And again, good example, all the coin purses and she has and bags are on that side. They look really good. They're organically stickers are nice and orderly, and both the banner and the backdrop make use of her style so you know exactly what you want from distance. Alright, so let's go to the scary part. You are selling at a con, that's technically income for you, and if you don't pay your taxes, something bad might happen, because you might want to be a con artist, but you don't want to be this con artist, you know? Yeah, you don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. And true story, yeah. So actually, I was vending at a PonyCon in New York, and like as I was flying out there, I got an email from California Board of Equalization saying, "Oh, you haven't paid your taxes on this con in San Francisco." I'm like, "Oh, I'll pay it when I get back. It's for this year, right?" Like, no, this is from 2 years ago. You still haven't paid your taxes on it. Like, oh, 2 years ago. So I had to quickly fill out the form and send them the money, and yeah, they keep track of this. Most cons will report who's selling, so you have to keep track. And if you fill out a license form, you have to make sure that you pay your things on time, because if you don't, you have to pay a fee. So I had to pay a $50 fee because I sent in my taxes late. Even though I thought I paid it, I must have forgot. So make sure you keep track of when you send your taxes. Make sure you send them ahead of time so you don't pay the fee. So first of all, most cons will require you to have a tax license before applying. Now, if you're applying to a first come first served con, you better have that tax license ready, because if you don't and you fill out the forms, they're, oh shoot, I don't have my tax license, then everyone who fills it out is going to get in and you are not, because you don't have your tax form. Some cons don't give you a tax license and they don't care about it. So, but you still have to pay money on it. So you have to be really, really careful about what you are doing. Know the laws of each state and hotel. Some states will have a higher tax bracket than others. So for Texas, I think it's only 8% sales tax you have to add on to your items that you have to pay the state. Here in Chicago, I think it's 11 or 12% sales tax, which is much, much higher. If you notice in the dealers in here, you probably have to pay a little bit extra in taxes. That's because it's in Chicago. Some cons, some states require you to pay right after the event within 30 days. Some say, it's, oh no, you can pay once a year, but you apply on this deadline. So make sure you know when you're ready to apply for these things. Some hotels and convention centers have different rules. So for example, at this convention center, you can't sell food. Because the convention center wants to make money selling their food, you cannot sell food. You can't even sell little things like candy. In fact, some cases, if it's Halloween, you can't even have candy for kids because that's technically distributing food. So some cons will not that. Or on the other hand, the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco, you cannot sell stickers because they had an issue with people putting stickers on their property. So that con did not allow people to sell stickers. And if you sell stickers, you get in trouble. So make sure you keep an eye on that. And of course, some cons, they're family friendly, so you might not be able to sell dakimakuras or kind of suggestive artwork. Some cons might have an adult area, like I think almost every single furry con has an adult area where you can sell stuff in. And some furry cons are actually very lenient about displaying adult stuff as long as it's kind of covered. But some cons like this, you have to be in the adult room or at least have it covered. Some cons, like the pony cons, which are more family friendly, not at all. You can't even have a cute, safe for work body pillow because it's still a body pillow. So make sure to know the rules for these different cons of what you could sell and what you cannot. If you are vending, make sure if you're taking cash, make sure you keep a track of how much cash you have to pay and taxes afterwards. Some cons like BLFC, Big Slow Fur Con in Reno, you pay all your taxes right after the con, and they have a tax person on site, so you don't have to worry about filling it out later. You pay for it right on site. Some cons, you have to send it in by mail, so again, keep track of all this stuff. If you have a credit card reader, so if you have Square or PayPal, like I use the PayPal reader, they might take a percentage, but PayPal and Square will report your earnings to the government, so make sure you pay what the record is, so you don't pay or not. But at the same time, because cons are now business for you, it's a business expense. So you can now start writing off stuff. Your airfare to get to this con is a write-off. So for example, my airfare here is a write-off. I had steak last night and the night before. Those steaks are write-offs for me. I haven't bought pins yet, but some cons I've bought pins and artwork, and that's a business expense because for me, when I buy stuff, it's research to see, oh, this is a great pin design. Who made this pin and what company did they use? Sometimes I need to buy a pin to do that. Or some cons that I don't even vend that, like I went to Disney Con in the Anime Convention Center, in the Anaheim Convention Center. I didn't vend at the con, but for me, I was networking with other people from the Disney company and seeing how professionals are displaying their booths. For me, that was a business trip and it's a business expense. Now, if you write off like 12 cons as a business expense, it's not going to work if you don't vend there. But if you write off 1 or 2 cons, it will be okay. And if you keep within your limit, food becomes a business expense, hotel cost becomes a business expense, and and travel become a business expense. And because of that, now you get tax deductions from your things. So for I think for the federal government, you're allowed to eat up to $40 a day, and that will be deducted from your taxes afterwards. If you travel by car, it's a little bit tricky because you can either do it by gas, by how much gas or how long it took to get there. For planes, trains, and buses, it's much easier. You just deduct the cost of your tickets. So make sure you save every receipt from every con you do. Sometimes having a separate business credit card or debit card is good, so you can keep track. Okay, I only use this business card when I'm vending at a con, so I know what's a deduction and whatnot. So I have a separate business card that I only use when I vend at cons, so I know this is what I paid for, this is where I get the deduction from. So yeah, make sure you do that. Sometimes it helps, you can't keep track of all this stuff. Sometimes it does help to get an accountant or actually pay a tax expert to help you fill out your taxes. So yeah, so make sure to pay your taxes sometimes. Again, you want to be a con artist, not this con artist, or the IRS will get you, and they will. In fact, Al Capone, one of the most corrupt, dangerous criminals in the United States, he wasn't arrested for any of his crimes because they couldn't prove him on that. They arrested him for tax evasion. So yeah, make sure get your taxes in, but also don't worry about it too, because a lot of times they don't even notice. You're one small vendor who vends at a small furry convention. You're not someone selling a bunch of like stocks and books and cars. You're just selling some artwork, and sometimes they might overlook it. So if you're a little bit late on sales, they say, oh, okay, fine, just make sure you pay us on time. But again, careful records, careful records. Alright, and with that, that ends the conclusion of my talking part of the panel. And for as long as we can remain in this room, I will be taking Q&As. And with that, I want to thank you for coming to the panel. You're free to ask me questions afterwards. If you want, you can also visit me in my booth. I'm at B3, B4 in the dealer's den. Feel free to visit me there. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at Midwest Furfest, and thank you for coming to the panel. And if you want business cards, I have business cards up here. So I have, the Fox character you've been seeing in the slideshows, he's part of my new webcomic I'm doing called So You Want to Be a Con Artist, which talks about vending at cons, and that webcomic should be coming up in January. And then I also have my regular business cards if you want to contact me about artwork and stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand as well. I'm free to answer questions. So. Any questions at the moment?